Hello, and welcome to Transforming Grief, one conversation at a time, a podcast dedicated to not only destigmatizing conversations around death and grief, but also exploring them as transformative threads that weave honesty, curiosity into the fabric of our shared human experiences. I am your host, Dr. Jessica Thomas, and today I am so honored to be speaking with Dr. Saffi Biasetti, a researcher, author, and practicing clinician for over 35 years, specializing in somatic psychotherapy and as an eating disorder specialist, certified mindfulness teacher, mindful self-compassion teacher, certified yoga therapist. Biasetti is featured teacher in the Self-Compassion in Psychotherapy program, where she shares her expertise in somatic self-compassionate interventions for eating disorder recovery. She leads well-received ongoing retreats, personal training workshops, as well as her Befriending Your Body certification program for eating disorder recovery. She is the author of the forthcoming book, Your Body Never Meant You Any Harm, a somatic guide to forgiving and healing your relationship with your body. In addition to her previous book, Befriending Your Body, a self-compassionate approach to freeing yourself from disordered eating, and one of my favorites, the Awakening Self-Compassion Card Deck. Welcome, Anne. I am so excited that you're here today. And I will say that Anne and I have known each other. We cross paths in our doctoral research studies, and we instantly connected over our passion and interest in transpersonal psychology and how oftentimes that was like such a huge missing link in psychotherapy and psychology and even in research. And so now I feel like we're having a full circle moment here. And we were distanced from all of that life stage from the beginning of the research and those studies. But here we are. And so I'm just so delighted to see you, Anne, and to be talking about like the meaningful work that you have put out there and the so many people you've helped. And the fact that your work has sort of intersected in this way with grief, which is my
Yeah.
work. And so I'm just so thrilled that we get to have this conversation.
I know, me too. Thank you, Jessica. And I love that. I love that, you brought it back there, right? Because
Hmm.
I remember the first time we all came together there and really how far it's all come for all of us and for both of us and the wonderful work that you're doing with that. And, who knew when we first stepped on campus what our work would even turn into and what we were even going to do, right? I mean, stepping onto,
Yeah.
I remember one question who ended up being my chair, Dr. Nether, when she said, you are going to pick a topic that you're going to marry. So she said, be really careful of your topic because you're going to marry this topic, not just for the years that you're here doing the research
Hmm.
studies, but probably forever. And it actually changed my topic because, that's what actually
Yeah.
made me say, my gosh, and she had us doing a little investigative embodied
Mm.
practice to discover that. And I remember feeling like, wow, self-compassion is what changed my own life so much. And my relationship on the embodiment level took another form with self-compassion. So when she
Mhm.
said that, I was like, well, that is it. And then, of course,
Yeah.
the first research, was on self-compassion in eating disorder recovery and led me to my understanding of embodiment and the
Mhm.
between those two constructs. So, yes, and here we
Yes,
are, and then so much other stuff formed out of that. Journey was wide open, right?
it was. It just, it's amazing I guess the impact that transpersonal research has.
Yeah.
And you kind of, it really does have this personal connection and transformative aspect to it. And so, well, the first question I always like to pose to guests is their personal connection to these topics. And I mean, you touched on it just a little bit, but would you share more about that for you?
Yeah, because self-compassion, I will say the study and the practice of self-compassion came into my life much later on. But once I studied it and practiced, I realized that actually it was in my life in so many ways, prior to that, we just didn't even have a name for it, because really out in the world, mindfulness was the center focus many years ago, more than self-compassion. And even though they go together, right, self-compassion became a much bigger focus later on. So really, my road to embodiment, I will say, started with my own recovery as a teenager with an eating disorder that I sort of found my way through on my own because there was no help really at the time. There was a
Mm,
lot of stigmatization around it, and a lack of knowledge of what it was all about. You'll understand this, having your work and this podcast where your listeners are understanding grief in a new way. So really the development of that when I was 16 happened to my body. I will say that. I use those
mm,
intentionally after the traumatic loss of my father. So my father died when I was 16. It was a very traumatic death. And that was when I had no idea what was happening inside my body. But I will give the words of what, come full circle now in this last research that I did in this upcoming book. I'll give the words that my participants have given about like what I was sensing in my body and how they expressed embodied grief, which was all I knew was at 16 when my life was also getting ready to transition and change, graduating
yeah,
high school, I was taking SAT, I had to take the
mm,
SAT, I think a month after his death, and moving on to college and all this kind of thing. All I remember feeling was an absolute weight and stuckness like glue in my body, weighed down, sluggish, unable to get a
mm,
sense of what I was feeling. I had no idea. There was this, piece in my body that all it wanted to do was to curl up and stay still for a while. And everything in my life at that time was asking me to go out and change and be
mm,
ready for the next step when all my body wanted to do was really lie
mhm,
down on the ground and be still and held for a while. So I couldn't understand all of that. So what I did notice at the time was the only thing that seemed to bring lightness was the lighter my body felt on a surface level. So there I began to, restrict my intake, not even on a body image piece, because that wasn't the first idea that came into my mind. What came into my mind was I just want everything to stop for a while.
yeah,
So, long story with that, I've kind of found my way into recovery. And again, when I look back on the self compassion road, one of the primary ways that I found my way out was through people very compassionately reflecting their concern for me. So they didn't
mm,
say things like, "What are you doing?" or "Don't do that," or "We don't like the way you're looking lately," or anything like that. They said things like, I care about you and you don't seem the same. Like
mm,
things have shifted, something is different. Are you okay? So they started expressing their compassionate concern and care. And something about that really spoke to me.
mhm,
And so I really engaged in that kind of languaging and
mhm,
started wondering about their comments. And at that point in time, was in my undergraduate studies as in counseling and social work, and I started getting curious about what was
mhm,
happening for me on a clinical level and also in my body.
yeah,
I found my way through, and a big way I found my way through was by engaging in my studies and
yeah,
really begin to structure my own life. One of the things that I noticed was that my body really responded to if I went back to what it always naturally knew and enjoyed, which was, I grew up in a big Italian family
yeah,
and food was central, and the structure of, "Oh, my 3 meals again, that was really nice." That's right, my body, that was natural to it, So I
mm,
kind of found my way through with that, but And then come later on in years, I started really engaging in contemplative practices such
Mhm.
as yoga. And at the time, mindfulness, like I said, was coming on board. But it was primarily the yoga that then brought me to a very different space and
Mm.
feeling in my body, one that made me recognize exactly this topic, that what did I really need to heal? So I was very healed on what we would call an eating disorder behavioral recovery in
Right.
my 20s. But
Right.
when I started my yoga journey, what I realized was I would lie on the mat or I would sit to meditate and tears would just pour out of me. Just and I remember there was one point I was terrified by it. Like,
Mhm.
what on earth is this? Where is this coming from? What does it mean?
Yes.
I went right back into my head,
Yeah.
trying to figure it out from my mind. And then there was a point in time where I just let it flow. And what I recognized is like, wow, oh my goodness, this is exactly what my body at 16
Mm.
needed to do. It needed to actually be held by the ground, lie down on the ground for
Mm.
it needed to feel ease, it needed to feel safety, it needed to feel secure, and then this emotion that I couldn't even name, who knew it was grief at that point?
Yeah.
But this emotion, which I now understand as grief, was able to shift into grieving. And there's a big difference between the two. Grief stuck is what I just mentioned before, like glue, that heaviness, everything.
Mm.
And when our body can begin to grieve,
Yeah.
not our mind, when our body can
Mhm.
actually release this grief, it
Mhm.
moves into the action of grieving, which
Mhm.
on an embodied level leads to a relief. It leads to a sense of relief because what I like to say to my clients, and all the people that I teach is that, and I know you know this as well, right? That we come into the world crying. So as embodied beings, grief and grieving actually is a natural process. So our
Mhm.
body's not afraid of grieving, but it is afraid and does create fear inside when that is held back.
So many jewels here, Anne, already. Well, I'm just really struck by your ability to, you said you laid down on the mat one day and you just began to cry. And it scared you, it terrified you,
Mhm.
but you didn't stop.
No, because
And
it also
then
got me so curious.
that's what I was going to say. There's something there for you, Anne, because a lot of people would stop there. They're like, "Oh no, I am not going there. I don't know what that was, but that was uncomfortable. I'm ashamed of that." And you instead leaned into that and you did it again. And then you
Yes,
did it
and
again.
again.
And then it sounds like to me like it got to the point where you just let go and let the tears go, let it go.
Absolutely. It actually became part of my practice.
Wow.
And it was quite amazing because, the yoga practice was one thing, like when I was in my body. And in some ways that felt safer because it made sense to me, like, oh, I must have released something
Yeah.
neuromuscular, and
Yes.
and that just produced like this great relief and
Yeah.
things were just fluid. But it made less sense to me in the meditation practice. And it was scarier in the stillness and my body being still and the tears coming. But then one day it was funny because it was about a year, like no joke. I mean, that's about how long it was that every time I sat and meditated that the tears would just pour. And then one day I sat down and they weren't there. And dare I say I missed them. I was like, where did it go? Where did you go, grief? Where did you go? And it was like in that moment, I had this embodied conversation, with my body that was like, okay, body, was that enough? Are you done? Is that enough for now? Is that enough for now? And that's like the big question I say on the embodiment journey, because grief and grieving in our
Mhm.
body will never be a one and
Mhm.
done.
Yeah.
It will be an ongoing for life process, as
Yeah.
much as it's sometimes hard to hear that. But the truth is, our bodies, because we're embodied beings, these bodies are constantly in flux and
Mm.
change. And that goes from everything to the external surface body
Mhm. Mhm.
image, which the world tells us should never change.
Mhm.
And we should
Mhm.
be ashamed of its changing.
Yeah.
It goes from everything to that too, when our body, right, if we're lucky, ages,
Yeah.
but our bodies will change internally. They will get sick. Some
Yeah.
things we know about, some things we don't know about.
Mhm.
There'll be, underneath in chapter 6 of this new book that's coming out is the chapter on embodying grief.
Mhm.
And I talk about that when we feel things like deception and betrayal from our body, like we
Mhm.
feel shocked by the things that come around, the bodily
Mhm.
changes, or we feel betrayed, like I treat
Mhm.
myself, I exercise and I eat this and I do that and I
Yeah.
still got this,
Yeah.
and I still, so when those things come around, it can really, if we don't catch what
Mhm.
is really happening in that moment, then it can really lead us down a dark road again of grief stuck, because really those deceptive moments or those
Yes.
moments that feel like betrayal, they're really grief
Right.
underneath. And that's a time that I tell everyone that's the signal to check in to
Yeah.
see if that stuckness is there. And then how are we going to embrace it to
Yeah.
help it move into that
Yeah.
action of grieving again, and that will be for
Yeah.
our lifetime, really.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, and I can see how it's so vital that this healing process be grounded in self-compassion, because if it's not, you just perpetuate the same shame cycles.
Absolutely, absolutely. Kristen Neff says, one of my teachers and colleagues, if, self-compassion, she says, is a great embrace to grief. It's a warm embrace, and what I say with it is self-compassion is the warm embrace to our body. Experience, embody grief and the grieving process. It is an absolute essential quality. And this is what I recognized, it through the two research projects that I did. The first
Yeah.
one, self-compassion, showed at that point, people talked a great deal about what it took to move into just even the beginning phases of their
Mhm.
recovery process, not to cause their body harm anymore. Most of them said at that point that self compassion and forgiveness had to go hand in hand at that point. And later, so I spent a lot of years in between understanding that, and I run my program, my Befriending Your Body program. So I've led hundreds of people through that program
Mhm.
that have heard their words. As a qualitative researcher, we're always,
Yeah.
and if we're not in a dedicated research project, where
Yeah, absolutely.
minds and bodies are always gathering those themes.
Mhm.
And so what I kept hearing was that there were two different areas of forgiveness that we were really talking about, though. And one of those areas were what I call forgiveness from the mind, which is really this very purposeful, effort filled idea of I must forgive something I've done wrong.
Mm.
And that's really different than what I based my second research on, which was an independent research project that I did, another qualitative grounded theory on what I called body forgiveness. And that was
Mhm.
very different because forgiveness from the body actually entails less efforting and more listening within.
Interesting, yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, so it entailed for people to begin to start to hear their body's messages of things like this, of
Mhm.
the tough emotions that needed to move through, that needed to be expressed. And that required not more thinking, it required more sensing and more feeling. And
Mm.
I say in this new book that how we know we move into body forgiveness is when we allow this grief to become a natural process, so that every time we're about to shift back into shame or blame, which comes from the mind, right? It's unnatural to these bodies. Every time we shift back into that, really, once again, the need to grieve, to move toward that statement of forgiveness to the body, which I insisted be the title of the book, which is,
Mhm.
something, I didn't mean any harm because I did the best I could do at that time, and my body didn't mean me any
Mhm.
harm. My body has always been just trying to figure this out with me and been trying to protect me.
Mhm.
So, self compassion in this research had to come first. People were
Mhm.
really specific, where in the last one, they were like, oh, I think self compassion and forgiveness, from the mind go
Mhm.
together. In this one, people were like, no, they were talking about the embodied sense of forgiveness. And they were saying self compassion must come first to
Mm.
hold all the tough emotions that are in the way of body forgiveness, which is grief and shame and blame and that regret and that deception and betrayal, all that really tough stuff. Without self compassion, we don't know how to embrace that gently.
Mhm. Right, and again, it goes back to, like, and if we don't do that, then we're just perpetuating the same underlying messages of shame and guilt.
That's
So,
right.
it's interesting, so, like, I guess what's coming to mind is, like, this, what we may be used to in the healing process is, like, from the top down. Like, we're gonna use our, our thinking brain, and we're gonna intellectualize something because we gotta understand it first,
Yes,
and we're gonna talk our way to it.
absolutely.
And versus from the bottom up, where no, we're going to be grounded in something first and use our bodies as that sacred vessel of sensing to
Absolutely.
create a safe space.
Exactly.
And if we can do that, then we get to a more authentic healing process.
That's right. Because when that's exactly it. It's really attending to the body first,
Yeah,
over the thinking mind. And it's not as if we don't create understanding. As a matter of fact, I have
totally.
this next book is in three parts, and part one is all embodied
Yeah.
understanding, which is
Hmm.
taking our understanding from the mind, but then bringing it into trying to understand what happened to our body
Hmm.
with those
Hmm.
thoughts. What happened to our body when we've carried around for a lifetime shame and blame and
Yeah.
regret?
Yeah.
How do we imagine that landed in our body? How do we
Mm-hmm.
imagine what do we imagine that's done to our nervous system? What do we imagine it's done to the choices then that we've made
Hmm.
or didn't make and things
Hmm.
like that. So it's such an important piece, that understanding, to ground it, to
Hmm.
center it inside the body. And that's what we must do first, so that we then can shift into a level of communication with our
Yeah.
body.
Yeah.
And that comes from on a sensory level, that
Hmm.
comes from way back when, I often say I wished, I remember I write this in the book, that I had gone to a doctor, when I was a teenager, and the doctor was like scolding me, and I had wished that the doctor would have said something to me like, dear, your endocrine system is struggling because it's been through so much pain.
Mm.
I mean, you know, I probably
Yeah.
would have run into his arms and been like, "Thank you. Oh my gosh, you just spoke such a body truth."
Yeah.
And so this is what happens, is that we try and bring these
Mhm.
things, these experiences of body, we try to make them a thought and an understanding through the mind, and then we leave the body. And,
Mm,
in the moments like that, I say to my clients, I'm like, well, let's not leave your body behind, your
mhm.
body is sad about that, let's rejoin and see if we can understand this process,
Yeah.
in particular, this process of whatever it is that we may be grieving, because there's so much to grieve living in a body. It's held all of our life experiences.
Yeah, and it will like you're saying, it continues to, and so it's a really good idea to get this relationship with our bodies in a good space. So when you're talking, I kind of have I envision this reconnection with the mind and body. And of
Mm.
course, I think as transpersonalists, we understand that they're not actually separate, right? I wonder if like we experience them as so separate because like here in the Western culture, like that's what we're born into is this separation.
Absolutely, and that is chapter 1,
Is it?
It has to be, and it's threaded throughout, because that's the first level of understanding that we must have is, my goodness, what happened?
Mhm.
What happened when we are born embodied beings and we go so far away from that?
Exactly.
How did that take place? And, this is, well, it took place hundreds of years ago, is where it took place when we declared that body and mind are separate entities. And worse than that is when it was, philosophers declared that not only separate entities, but that the body had no participation in our self understanding.
Yes.
So the declaration was that the body was of no use
Mhm.
to the formation of a self
Mhm.
and an understanding of who we are. And that could not be further from the truth. And thankfully, the whole world of neuroscience
Yes.
now has given us
Wow.
very, hard science, evidence based
Yeah.
understanding of that. Theories like embodied cognition and even polyvagal theory, which
Mhm.
over by storm and, which I'm trained in as well. It's like, yeah, I'm so glad that these theories are becoming more centralized now and integrated
Yeah.
into mental health care and even
Uh,
into some of our medical care now and understanding, but we have such a long way to go. So this is that has to start first. We have to understand what has pulled us so far away
mhm.
from our sensing, feeling natural state, what's natural in our bodies, to what is so unnatural and leaves us feeling so disconnected and
Yeah.
unwell.
Yes. Well, how do we know when grief is like stuck in our bodies and when there is a shift?
Yeah, it's a great question, because really what ends up happening when grief is stuck like that is we will feel what I call off our center.
Mm,
We won't feel like we have a safe place to land in our body. So the expression of that I hear the most is people who say, I have no clue what I sense and feel, or I'm afraid to go near my body. Or they say things like, I feel disconnected, from the head up from my body. They will notice the thing that will stand out the most is a lot of feeling of unsafety around the expression of any emotion, because it's such a bodily experience, so they'll
yes.
say, boy, I'm getting really scared, because I don't, if I go near that, it'll never stop, So that kind of expression of unsafety around a body usually tells me very quickly. And of course, in the world of trauma recovery, what's underneath all of it, of course, is absolute grief of, what
Mm,
happened, not just to a self, but to a body. And so that understanding, as soon as I hear that, I know that we have a path to travel
yeah. Yeah.
slowly toward that grief. It's certainly not something that I work with immediately. That
Yeah.
takes time. It takes time for someone to really feel safe enough to be able to go toward the sensations that their body's having, and then to understand how much emotion lives there, and then what emotion,
Yeah. Well,
it's a step-by-step process that, I encourage people to, I actually have a number of practices that
mm,
bring people just to understanding and getting curious about what may be held where in their body. And what I mean by that, of course, is what the nervous system has deemed as unsafe. And what happens with that is when we have those moments of
mhm,
embodied unsafety, really what we're doing is our nervous system, in trying to protect us, has created patterns of neuromuscular holding.
mhm,
So, what people don't even realize is how they're walking around in that armor, and grief
mm,
the most in the armor of the belly. It tends to live really deep and low in the body. I'll say this
mm,
just to yoga therapist, if I'm going to work even just in a yoga therapy session and someone is in a deep grief process, I know that one of the areas I'm going to work with in their body is that very lower half beneath the
mm,
navel, in the lower abdominal area and the pelvis area. So when people in my research talked about the grief, they unanimously, every one of the women in the study said it's all here. And they went right to that lower belly area.
mhm.
But I just had someone the other day I was working with saying, when I asked her to describe it, she said, it's like a rock in my stomach.
Wow.
And so I've heard this expression of embodied grief like this for years, but yet the beautiful part is when they talk about it opening and releasing,
Wow.
they all use their hands and in upward sweeping motion,
Mhm.
which indicated, it indicated a lot. As a somatic psychotherapist. It indicated
Yeah.
an interesting piece to me because that indicates even the fluidity of our autonomic functioning. So
Wow.
basically, on some levels, they were metaphorically uh,
Mhm.
saying that, on a metaphysical level, they were saying that, oh, grief brings them into what we call a dorsal vagal state in their autonomic function, which is that collapse.
Mhm.
Felt the nausea and the heaviness in the gut is
Mm.
often because that area of the body is experiencing that change. And then when they talked about the grief flowing inward and upward and out,
Ah.
that's an uplift. That's
Yeah.
aesthetic energy needed to bring us back to internal stabilization or back to our body
Mhm.
center. So it really was a beautiful expression of, they were
Mhm.
saying the words, but really they were basically saying, oh, I can feel the internal shift of my
Mhm.
autonomic system taking care of
Mhm.
the body and its re-regulation again. So it's quite fascinating that way.
So, an embodied therapist or practitioner would assist the client in locating sensations in their body that
Yes.
feel stuck, that give those physical sensations and signals,
Yes.
and help them to re-embody.
Exactly.
Um,
Yeah, my big question that is a simpler one for people to understand is really even starting with words. Like, let's say someone starts
mhm.
to talk about a grief experience,
Yeah.
rather than, because people don't know much about their body yet, so
Right.
if I say to them, where do you feel that in your body, that's a hard one, so I don't often use those words. What I'll say inside is, let's take a couple of those words that you just told me.
Mm,
What's that like inside?
mm.
I may not even say the body. I will just say, like, what's it like inside? And often people very much can be like, "Oh, I feel sick inside," or I feel, so
Wow.
when people are saying, they actually are using the language of the body, they just don't know it. So
Yeah.
they'll say to us, like, I felt sick inside, or I felt my, heart racing.
Mhm.
So as soon as I hear that inside piece, that's where I'll help them and guide them, and direct it in a little bit more. There's a practice in this upcoming book that is called Your Body as a Canvas.
Mm.
visual, and I know you work a lot with
Yeah.
visual, right, in your grief.
Yeah.
So as a visual, I asked them to imagine if their body was a blank canvas,
Mm.
where would this? And people really have a much easier time with that before they can locate sensation. I mean,
Yeah.
that's a process that happens
Yeah.
down the road, So,
Right.
but to take a visual image, and some people even draw it out. I have people after
Mhm.
session tend to go and create pieces of artwork and things like that that represent what they noticed.
Yeah, I guess I see that happening in my practice with within and without is when people resonate with, you know, their images and, whether it be a texture or something symbolic, and they'll say, I feel that inside of me. This is how I feel.
Yeah, that's excellent. Yeah,
So,
that's exactly it.
yeah, that sounds like a good stepping stone to then, that sort of a stepping stone to going deeper than like,
That's right.
mm-hmm.
It's sort of the place if we can start there, then we have actually a shared language and some place to ground when we come to those really tough emotions.
Right. Yeah, I could see that as an anchor.
Yeah, but body location and the body's experience of sensation has to come first before start bringing in these really tough emotions.
Right. Yeah, that makes a lot of sense to me, as I'm thinking about that that anchor and what can help people feel safe to even to go in that direction.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Because as we were saying, these heavy emotions of
Mhm.
before people even know it's grief, right? The heavy emotions that I
Right.
earlier, like we were saying, of shame and blame and betrayal and deception
Mhm.
and anger, as we know, those are all the emotions that are the cover ups
Yeah.
for really, really vulnerable emotion like grief. And so, it takes a lot to convince not just a mind, but it takes
Mhm.
a lot to convince the body that it
Yeah.
will be safe enough to let go of those armoring emotions.
Right.
So our body, what the way I like to describe it is it's kind of like a little scared puppy dog at times, and we just,
Mhm.
okay, just take one more step toward me.
Mhm.
We're only going to take one more step. Yeah. And I kind of
Mhm.
it's in that way that they're only going to go one step at a time toward this. We're not going into body doesn't like anything fast,
Mm.
surprised. Our body likes to go slow.
I think that's such an important thing to remember, and because I'm just thinking of our culture and how we can be so impatient and so consumed with production
Yes,
and being productive. And if we don't see immediate results, then we're done here.
absolutely. Yes, yes.
Mm.
And that goes even for forms of therapy too, and how, as we know, as transpersonal psychologists, we understand really the gift in going slower. But when we come up against a lot of cognitive behavioral treatments that are very time limited and quick, what it actually ends up doing is it can cause a real dissonance, right? Because somebody can leave actually with more shame and blame because they can say, well, how come if this is supposed to be in 6 sessions or whatever, how come I couldn't get there?
Yeah.
And it's like, "What? No, absolutely
Yes.
not." On the embodied level, that cannot happen in your body that way.
Mhm.
We cannot force this process of coming together and healing mind and body.
Mhm.
It has to be a slow pace. It has
Mhm.
to be slowing down. As a matter of fact, one of the embodied practices and interventions I work with the most is interoceptive awareness. And interoception is that inner signaling from our body, the
Mhm.
internal signaling. All research shows that we cannot have access to the sensations of our body without slowing down. So
Wow.
when we are moving fast, even in my beloved practices, as a yoga therapist, I tell people this in active yoga. When we're moving fast, even in the lovely mind body practice of vinyasa yoga, when we're moving fast, we will not have as much sensory awareness unless we're slowing down during that practice, doing longer holds, getting quieter, staying steadier for a while. So this is where, as a yoga therapist, I deliver the practices that are more stable and more sensory based, such as
Mhm.
in yoga and restorative yoga, myofascial release yoga, things like that, that allow people to have movement, but
Yeah.
slower and stiller. And that's where the sensory body comes alive. So,
Mhm.
yeah, pausing and slowing down is essential.
Yeah. Yeah, that seems like such a important reminder in all this, and I feel the tension a bit even in talking about it because I feel the tension between what the outside world expects and wants and that just sort of infiltrating my mind and expectations of myself.
Yes, it's everything opposite of that.
Yeah, it is.
But, that's again where a good reminder for all
Mhm.
of us, and I really try and put this into practice for myself because, like everyone, my life is busy too. But one of the embodied invitations that I offer is to our mind will believe that we need big things for our
Mm.
internal shift. And actually, our body requires very little. It does
Wow.
not need big things. Our body requires so little to shift. And it's a misconception, a misunderstanding about our inner body to believe that it requires some enormous, giant intervention. If you wake up in the morning and spend 2 minutes holding your warm cup of tea or coffee
Right.
and taking a couple of breaths, your body appreciates that. So
Mm.
even if it is a busy, busy day ahead, to take one moment like that is appreciated. To take one moment when you open your eyes in the morning to stay
Mhm.
in bed and just begin to stretch out your fingers, your toes, your hands, your feet,
Mm.
to check in with your energy
Mm.
level before you get out of bed. Just those 2 minutes, your body appreciates and will respond with an internal shift. So those little moments add up. Every little moment like that, I say, is, if your body could speak, it would say, "Thank you for recognizing me today."
Mhm. Mhm.
That's
Yeah.
how we begin in this busy life,
Yeah.
that we think we have no time unless it's a dedicated, hour or hours a day.
Yeah, and I think that becomes a real barrier. It makes it feel out of reach.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Yeah, so I love that as a really important reminder that it we don't need, like you said, these big things, and in fact, when we, are when we think that way, again, it becomes a sense of like, "Oh, I can't do that."
That's right. Exactly.
Mhm.
And that same practice is what I invite in the exploration of grief in the body and grieving, where we don't have to like sit there and like really get into the body, all the- lie down on the ground, on the belly, let your head rest in your hands and just feel comfort and let your body do the rest.
I love that. I love that. Thank you so much for sharing that piece and your wisdom and knowledge. Is there anything that you want to share with folks about like your program or upcoming book? I can certainly add these resources in the show
Sure.
notes for folks that they can, find. But anything coming up, any dates or yeah.
Just at the release of the book, the new book, Your Body Never Meant You Any Harm, is coming out July 1st of 2026. Presale is open now through Penguin Random House.
Mhm.
Program, Befriending Your Body program is ongoing. And I have many certified teachers out there in the world across globally that are also running the program. So people can always look in their time zone for that program as well. And then I always like to highlight on the Befriending Your Body program website, there's a page of free resources
Mhm.
and to just hop on there because there's a ton of embodiment practices
Mhm.
that are free downloads that people can begin this journey moving
Yeah.
toward their body. There's a beautiful practice of body forgiveness there that people can partake in, on their own time. And one of the things that I'm excited to create from this upcoming book will be an embodiment community.
Mm,
So more to stay tuned with that, more to come.
I love that. Yeah. Well, thank you for sharing that. And I feel in my body right now, I feel a sense of joy in my chest. I feel lighter. And I just wanted to say that because I can see where even this conversation, was enlightening and I could feel it internally. So
That's
I
I love hearing that.
thank you so much, Anne.
You're so welcome. Thank you for having me on.